Lauren is with our Abortion Survivors Network, and I heard her speak about a year and a half ago at Paul Smith at Citizen Impact, and I told her that this might be one of the best I have ever heard speaking on this issue, and we're just so honored to have you here with us. So here's the PowerPoint, clicker, or whatever, you're ready to roll. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction. No pressure. My goodness. So many amazing people that we have heard from today, and it's just such an honor for me to be in this room with all of you pastors. I feel very humbled. This feels like an Esther-like moment for me, and I'll explain why I feel that way today. But I just want to thank Mike and his team for putting this together, and all of you for being here and being such champions on this issue of life. I hope to put a little bit of an exclamation point on everything that we've heard today by sharing my story with you. You know, we all have a story, and I don't know if you're like me, but I grew up loving to read. Some of you might not like to read so much. You might like documentaries or even stories from Scripture that touch your heart and your mind and your life. But I loved reading, and many times you would find me in my middle school years underneath the covers with my book light late at night, reading stories. I particularly liked Nancy Drew and Choose Your Own Adventure. But here's the thing about the Choose Your Own Adventure book series. I would always read every possible option when I would get to the end of the page and it would say, go to page such and such or go to page such and such to go this direction in the story. I always had to read all the options. I was really indecisive, and I had to know the outcome before I chose. And that has become a theme in my life up until this point, and I can just look back and see that God has a sense of humor about how he prepared me for this journey that I've walked. When I was in college, God took me to the University of Georgia at the same time that Benjamin Watson was actually there, and I was joking earlier with some of the ladies that we kind of have been following each other over these past 2 years. Almost every event I go to, Ben and I are speaking together, and that's just really crazy because never once did I meet him on the campus of the University of Georgia. But now I see him all the time in the pro-life world, and it's just a really cool way that how God weaves our stories and our journeys together. But I actually went to Georgia with a plan of majoring in broadcast journalism. My plan was to be a television news reporter. So I worked really hard for 4 years of college. I did all the internships. I did everything that I felt that God wanted me to do to be successful at that. And the second semester of my senior year of college, I went home to my hometown, Fayetteville, Georgia, and I led a Disciple Now weekend. I was a college leader for a group of high school students, 10th grade girls, at Disciple Now weekend. How many of you have Disciple Now at your churches? Does anyone have a Disciple Now? So Fayette County is really unique in that all of the churches in Fayette County, well, a lot of them, do Disciple Now weekends together. And so we kind of pool all of our resources together and bring in a speaker and a band to lead worship. And everybody goes to one church in the county to be a part of all these large group sessions. And that particular weekend, Casting Crowns was the worship leader. This was before Casting Crowns was really well known. And that Saturday night, as I'm supposed to be loving on this group of 10th grade girls and walking with them through hopefully a salvation experience or a time in their life where God is really, getting a hold of them, God got a hold of me. And I'm finding myself on the front altar of that church weeping as Casting Crowns, the leader of Casting Crowns, is talking about whose voice are we going to listen to? Are we going to listen to God's voice or the voice of the people in this world? And they were introducing the song, The Voice of Truth. I know many of you are familiar with it. In that moment, in front of those steps, God met me there. And God told me that I had been following my path for my life and not his plan for my life. So God took me on a 180. He sent me back home. I moved in with my parents. I graduated. I moved back in with my parents. I was very confused. I didn't know what God was calling me to do. And so I did the most, the thing that felt the most comfortable to me, which was to go become an intern at my home church. So that year, I proceeded to be a student ministry intern, and throughout that year, God was really at work in my heart. And it was that summer, on June 20th of 2004, that I had just gotten home from a student ministry retreat. My mom walked upstairs and knocked on my bedroom door with tears in her eyes. And she said, "Lauren, what are you doing today?" And I said, "I'm just unpacking from the trip I was on." "Why?" And she said, "I have something I need to talk to you about." She came in my room, she sat down on my bed, and my mind was absolutely racing. I had no idea what my mom was about to say. I started thinking, are my parents getting a divorce? Is my dad not my real dad? Is one of my sisters adopted? Like, all of these things started just racing through my mind. And as she sat down on the bed, my mom said, "Lauren, I know that you've always known that you were born 13 weeks premature. But what you didn't know were all of the circumstances that led up to your premature birth. You see, when I got pregnant with you, I was a freshman in college at the University of Arkansas. Your dad was a senior. And having a baby at the age of 18 was not part of my plan. And so immediately I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to have an abortion. An abortion? That information was absolutely shocking. My mom proceeded to tell me the story of what had happened. She got pregnant in the winter of 1982, and for about a month after she found out she was pregnant, she and my dad just kind of avoided talking about it, thinking that maybe it would just go away. They wouldn't have to confront the issue. But as you can imagine, my mom started having pregnancy symptoms. She started getting a little bit of a bump. Things started happening, and she started realizing, I don't think I can keep this a secret, and I think I might have to do something about it. So my mom went to a doctor in town and was told that she was about 8 weeks pregnant. And as she started to think about what she was going to do and process the news, she made up her mind that she wanted to have an abortion. She went to my dad's apartment, and she knocked on his door with the news that she was planning to have an abortion. And my dad was not on board with my mom's plan. My dad actually begged my mom to reconsider. My mom had made up her mind, though, and so she made an appointment at a clinic in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she asked a friend from high school to take her to that clinic. They drove all the way to Tulsa. She had a phone number, she had an address, and when they got to the clinic, they found that the clinic doors were closed. You see, the clinic had moved to the other side of town, and my mom, when she was able to call and talk with the clinic, she found out that she had missed her appointment window, and she had to make another appointment. They drove the 2 hours back to the University of Arkansas and made another appointment. Her friend took her back the following day, and my mom went into a small ultrasound room where they measured the size of that baby growing inside of her. In Tulsa at the time, in Oklahoma at the time, they could only do abortions up to 12 weeks, and my mom measured just over 13 weeks pregnant. She was turned away. They wouldn't go through with the abortion. So my mom went to a clinic in Little Rock, Arkansas, and made an appointment. My dad this time had agreed to drive my mom to a friend's house, and that friend was going to take her to the abortion appointment. As they were driving through the mountains of northern Arkansas, my mom laid her head down on my dad's lap, and my dad began to pray, "God, please intervene." They rounded a corner in the mountains, and my dad says it was like fog he had never seen before was dropped in the middle of those mountain roads. It was so thick that he couldn't see the front of his car. And as they continued to try to drive slowly, my dad knew he had to turn around. It wasn't safe. And so they drove back down the mountain, back to my mom's apartment, and her plan was thwarted once again. She made another appointment. This time her friend came and picked her up at her apartment. They drove to Little Rock, Arkansas, and when she walked into that same ultrasound room, she found out that she was measuring 15.3 weeks pregnant. And in Arkansas at the time, they could only do abortions up to 15 weeks. Another roadblock. My mom was very determined and asked the clinic staff for more information about another place that she could go. And they referred her to a clinic in Dallas, Texas, that did abortions up to 20 weeks. my mom took a final exam. She hopped in the car after her final exam with a friend, and they drove to Dallas. When they got to the clinic in Dallas, they did another ultrasound, and she measured, this time, 21.6 weeks pregnant. Now, you have to understand that it had been less than 2 weeks since the last appointment that my mom had been to. She started feeling like things were spiraling out of control. She said it was like somebody bigger than her was trying to prevent her from going through with her plan. So the clinic in Dallas referred her to their sister clinic on the other side of Dallas that did abortions up to 22 weeks. My mom began to plead with the clinic that she was at and say, will they please take your ultrasound results? Because I know exactly what's going to happen. If I leave here and I have to go have another ultrasound, my plan's not going to work. I'm going to get thwarted again. So they called. They set up an appointment for my mom. They said they would take their sister clinic's ultrasound results, and they did. The next morning, my mom walked into that clinic, and they started a 2-day dilation and evacuation abortion procedure. If you're not familiar with that procedure, it's actually a procedure where they take this seaweed-type substance called laminaria. They insert it into the woman's cervix, and the laminaria dilates her cervix. They tell her to go home, take Tylenol for pain, and come back the following morning. And when she comes back, her body is fully dilated and ready to give birth. And at that point, they take 4 steps, and they go in and they pull the baby out piece by piece. They inserted the laminaria into my mom's cervix. She went back to the place that she was staying that night. And she was actually staying with her friend's sister. And the sister was about the same number of weeks pregnant that my mom was. And when she found out why my mom was there, she wasn't very happy about the fact that she was staying with her. She began to talk to her sister and tell her sister that she asked if her friend realized that there was an actual baby growing inside of her. She asked if she had had any pain that felt like gas bubbles or anything, and if she felt the movement of the baby. And as her friends started to talk to her, my mom started to realize, yeah, I've actually felt the baby kicking and moving around. So my mom was in labor, she was in pain, and all these questions were starting to flood her mind. About midnight that night, the Lord moved my dad to call my mom. My dad asked if he could pray with my mom, and when my dad said amen, my mom was crying. And she said, if you will drive to Dallas and meet me at the abortion clinic tomorrow morning, I'm 95% sure I won't go through with the rest of the procedure. My dad was ecstatic. He wanted with everything in him to drive to Dallas, but he had no way to get there and no money. And so he went to the house of a couple from his church named Bill and Jana. When my dad got there, it was pretty late at night, and Bill was asleep, but Jana was still awake. She welcomed my dad in. She knew nothing about my mom or the situation, but she could tell my dad was panicked. And she said, William, what's going on? And my dad said, my girlfriend's in Texas, and she's going to have an abortion, and I have no way to get there, and I don't have any money. And just the flood of emotions started to come out. And Jana got on her knees in her living room with my dad and began to pray, God, if it is your will for us to help William, please confirm this through my husband. Jana went into her bedroom where Bill was sleeping and woke Bill up. And Bill handed my dad his credit card and said, William, go to Dallas and save your baby. And as they walked out of the house, Jana followed that up with, and if she needs a place to stay, she can stay with us. My dad drove to Dallas, got to the clinic just in time for my mom's appointment, walked into the clinic, and my mom wasn't there. She wasn't in the waiting room. The clinic staff wouldn't give my dad any information about where my mom was. And so my dad started pacing up and down the hallways, and he began to pray, God, we haven't come this far. Please, Lord, keep her from making this decision. As my dad turned around, the elevator doors opened, and my dad was overjoyed because my mom was standing there, and she had overslept. As she walked in, they went to go tell the abortionist that they weren't going to go through with the procedure. And they actually swept my mom back into a room and tried to talk her out of her decision. They told her of all the risks that she was taking, not only to herself, but also to that unborn baby. They told her that she would probably miscarry or have a stillborn baby. And my mom looked at the abortionist and said, "I'm willing to take the risk." So the abortionist told my mom to drive back home, lying down in the back seat of her car with her feet propped up so that, quote, the baby wouldn't fall out. They got in that car. They drove back to Little Rock. And as they were driving back to Little Rock, my mom began to recount for my dad all of the events that had transpired along the way, the roadblock after roadblock that she had faced. My dad got a smile on his face, and he started to tell my mom of all the specific prayers that he had been praying. You see, when my mom left my dad's apartment that day, they were not on speaking terms. But my dad was praying for my mom's every move. He was keeping up with her through her friends, and he was praying very specifically at every clinic that God would intervene time and time again. And time again, he did. In fact, my dad says that God did 15 miracles along the way, 15 roadblocks that he put in my mom's path in order to save my mom from going through with that procedure. So my mom went to see a pro-life doctor when she got back to Little Rock. My dad had actually set up the appointment for my mom. And my mom also moved in with this young married couple named Bill and Jana. Bill and Jana spent their days working and caring for their 2 preschoolers. They turned their office into a bedroom for my mom. And at night, they would stay up really late talking about what they should do. Now, I actually have a video of my mom telling the rest of the story, so I'm going to pause right here and let you hear it from her.
1982, very early in the morning, I woke up in the middle of the night and everything was wrong. Bill and Jana, the couple that I was living with, I went into their bedroom and woke Jana up and told her that something's not right. And so she told me that we needed to go to the hospital. She was born at 8:23 in the morning. She was 13 weeks premature. One of the nurses asked if I'd like to see her. I said yes. And when I saw her, I knew I couldn't give her up. But at the same time, I didn't have a plan. Bill and Jana were a young married couple at the time with 2 small children. Bill and Jana saw a need. They gave themselves. They gave their home. They made their lives uncertain because of me, a stranger. They were the no judgment zone. Yeah. William and I did end up getting married, and we have 2 other children. And we put the abortion capers in a box and set it high on the shelf. And it wasn't something we talked about. Lauren came home from college. We had never told her any of this. I can only explain it as just one of the few times in my life that I knew that God was speaking to me. I knew that I had to go home and tell Lauren her story. So I went home and we went into her room and shut the door, and I told her the same story. I told her, I don't know why, but I know that God wants me to tell you this, and we never meant for it to be a secret. How ironic is that? You know, the baby that I rejected, I was worried about her rejecting me. I told her, I don't see myself ever telling this story, but you have my permission to tell it, because I just don't feel like I can. It's like all of those feelings that are inside that box on the shelf, you know, it exploded. Looking back on it now, there was a lot of trauma involved. I can't imagine the trauma that would be there if you had actually had an abortion. I'm only beginning to deal with my own guilt and shame that I didn't even know I had. But when I pulled the box off the shelf and opened it, it exposed all of that crud inside. It it's taken 40 years for me to realize that stuffing it all away, it has totally impacted my life. That baby that, I fought to get rid of and then fought to keep, I love her so much. I can't imagine life without her. I see her kids and think if I had gotten what I wanted, then they wouldn't be here. Lauren's the one that made me a mom.
It's hard for me to watch it, no matter how many times I watch it or tell this story, because I see the brokenness and the pain. And I remember back to sitting in that bedroom, my bedroom, with my mom, and the amount of emotion that I saw in her eyes and heard in her voice when she shared my story with me that day. She was honestly afraid that I was going to hate her and never speak to her again. And it took her a very long time to share this story with me. I want you to think about the people in your life who maybe are carrying a secret with them. This secret of abortion is very real and very traumatic and very hard. It doesn't just impact women. I've seen it in my dad. My dad has actually had a harder time with me sharing my story than my mom has. And when I share this story, I tell my dad, Dad, you're the hero in this story. You're the one who prayed and asked God to intervene. And people don't see you as anything but that. But you see, the enemy is clever. And he convinces my dad that his decision to sleep with my mom before they got married is the ultimate worst sin of all. There are so many people sitting in our churches who are dealing with this same pain, this same shame, this same regret. And we, the church, have the opportunity to come alongside of them and walk them to a place of freedom and redemption and healing. And that's the journey that I've had the opportunity to walk with my mom. It has been God ordained. Nobody else could have written that story. Right after my mom told me my story, she looked at me and she said, Lauren, I have no idea why I'm telling you this right now. My eyes filled with tears because you see, 1 week before, I had been asked to share my testimony at a county-wide youth event in our county. And I looked at the man who was organizing the event and I said, I have a really boring testimony. I grew up in church. I came to know Jesus from a young age. And I walked the straight and narrow. I don't have a Saul on the road to Damascus kind of a testimony. Not kidding you, less than 2 weeks later, my mom walked into my room and told me this story. And it was like God had confirmed in me that he had a purpose and he had a plan and he had a calling on my life. It was very different from my plan, but God had called me to share this story because it's not my story, but it's his. It's a story about his healing and his redemption. And so I want you to know that it's been a 20-year journey. I worked in full-time ministry for almost 20 years at 3 different churches in the Atlanta area. I did Next Gen Ministries. I did everything from adult discipleship to student ministry to children's ministry. And in January of 2020, I connected with an organization called the Abortion Survivors Network. It was a fluke thing, but a God-ordained moment. I was scrolling through social media. I clicked on a news article. I saw a quote from a lady named Melissa Oden, also an abortion survivor and founder of the Abortion Survivors Network. And I immediately fired off an email to Melissa and told her that I had this story about abortion, but I wasn't sure if you would consider me, quote, an abortion survivor. And Melissa responded back right away in complete grace and love and said, absolutely, you're an abortion survivor. Your mom started an abortion procedure and you survived. So yes, you're an abortion survivor. Well, the only other abortion survivor I knew of at the time was someone named, who might be familiar to all of you, named Gianna Jessen. Gianna was born alive after a saline infusion abortion in an abortion clinic. And so when I thought of an abortion survivor, that's who I thought of. And as only God would have it, 3 years prior maybe, when I was like my senior year of high school, I had heard Gianna speak at a youth retreat at summer camp at my home church. And so her story stuck in my mind and my heart, and all those years later, I remembered her name, and I started Googling like crazy. Gianna Jessen, Melissa Oden, abortion survivors. And God really showed me that not every abortion survivor is in a place where they can share their story. There's a lot of trauma involved. It takes a lot of healing to get there. I'm one of the lucky ones because I grew up in a Christian home. My mom came to know Jesus as a result of everything, all the miracles that God did in her life through my story. And so I was raised in a Christian family. I knew nothing but that, and I knew the love of Jesus. And God had met me and was calling me out and setting me apart to be a voice for the unborn and for those abortion survivors who can't speak for themselves. So I miss this picture. This is my whole family. I'm going to show you guys that. My parents, my two sisters, my sister's husband, and now my parents have 5 grandsons, which is really sweet because my dad prayed for all those years for a boy, and now he got 5 grandsons. But this is my Abortion Survivor Network family, just a picture of a few of them. I went on a retreat, I guess about 3 years ago, and got to meet 25 abortion survivors in person. And so these are some of the pictures from that retreat. And let me just tell you, babies actually do survive abortions. Our stories are very varied. They're very different. Everybody's is very unique. Everything from being born alive in an abortion clinic to surviving the abortion pill to coat hanger, but pre-row abortion procedures. And Abortion Survivors Network has actually connected with about 900 abortion survivors around the world. Now, the statistics on abortion survival, this just kind of gives you some terminology. An abortion survivor is an individual who remains alive after an attempted abortion. It can include a chemical abortion, a surgical abortion. As we know, abortion pill is the most common type of abortion. Some abortion survivors actually survive being a twin. Their twin is aborted. They think the pregnancy has ended, but there's another baby inside. And many of my friends at Abortion Survivors Network were actually a twin. So those are the different types of procedures. I do want to mention this because the most reliable data we have on abortion survivors actually comes from Canada. You may or may not be aware that the United States does not have a requirement to report born alive infants. And so the most reliable data we've taken at the Abortion Survivors Network comes out of Canada. And based on 7 years of Canadian data, we know that the rate of abortion survivors is 0.21%. So out of every pregnancy, 0.21% of those babies will survive abortions. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge number, but when you extrapolate that data and you put it over the number of abortions that have taken place in the United States, we estimate that during the 49 and a half years that Roe v. Wade was the law of our land, there were 85,817 babies who survived abortions during that 50-year time period. So now, as far as state-by-state data, there are only a handful of states that actually require born-alive abortion reporting. This is something that I'm prayerful about in our state of Georgia. I know that some of the lobbyists and some of the organizations you see are really lobbying to require data to be reported in Georgia, but we're not there yet. But in these other states, you can see how many failed abortions and incomplete abortions have taken place. And actually in Minnesota, their reporting law has been repealed, and so they're not even on this list anymore of states that report. All right, so there's the number of abortion survivors as of December of 2024. more than 900 that we are aware of. Abortion Survivors Network doesn't just connect with the babies who survive abortions. Abortion Survivors Network also connects with the families of abortion survivors. One of the miracles that God has done through my journey, my mom kind of talked about it on the video, is that my mom at first, when we very first talked about my story, my mom thought that it was like a one and done kind of thing. She was like, I told you, I did what God said, I'm home free. I don't have to share this with anybody else ever again. But God had really put it on my heart after my mom shared my story with me that he was calling me to share it. But I wanted my mom to be okay with that and to be ready. I wanted both of my parents to be okay with that and to give me their permission to do that. And so it has been a journey. I told you it took 20 years. But about a year and a half ago, my mom, Melissa, the founder of Abortion Survivors Network, asked me if my mom and I would share our story together on video, and that's the video you just watched. So you can actually go to Abortion Survivors Network's YouTube channel or to my personal YouTube channel and see us both sharing our versions of the full story. But that was such a God-ordained thing because my mom would never have done that on her own. God used Melissa and God used the Abortion Survivors Network to help my mom walk that journey. And I can tell you, a year and a half later, she shared it 3 more times. We just got back from Washington, D.C., filming it with EWTN, the worldwide Catholic television station. We filmed it in a Students for Life campaign. And the thing about it is, every single time my mom shares, I watch that weight continue to be lifted off of her shoulders, that weight that she had been carrying for so much of her life. So my challenge to you guys today, I know I've talked about a lot of different things, but what I do want to share with you is that saying yes to God and walking alongside of women and men who have felt and experienced this pain of abortion is incredible. It's an incredible journey. It's a God-sized journey. It takes patience. It takes perseverance. It takes love. As my mom says, it's an inconvenience. She was an inconvenience to a young married couple named Bill and Jana. But look what God has done in the process. I'm going to actually skip this video for time's sake. But what I do want to show you is this. I just got back from Arkansas. In January, I was asked to speak at the Arkansas March for Life. And the picture with the scarves is me, my mom, and Jana. Another God-sized miracle is that they marched in the Arkansas March for Life together, my mom and Jana, where my story took place. And they actually stood on the Capitol steps while I shared our story, and I got to honor them for their courage, for their love, for their support, and for their willingness to say yes to God. That is the very first time my mom has actually heard me share my story in person. You see, we could film our story together and we could talk about it in that kind of a setting, but for some reason for my mom, sitting in an audience and hearing me share it made it become far more real to her. And so it was a God-sized miracle to get her to the place where she was ready. But what I can see all throughout my story is God-sized miracles along the way. And the fact that when we are willing to say yes to God and to walk in obedience to Him, then He is a miracle worker. So I would just challenge you today. I know that you are all here because you love the Lord. You're serving Him faithfully. And maybe you have women like my mom and men like my dad and babies like me in your congregation, walking with them toward healing is the biggest gift possible. I tell people that God didn't just save my life physically through everything that He did in my story, but He saved my mom spiritually too. And we know that our God is in the business of healing and redemption and miracles. And we can join in His story. He writes the best stories. And I'm living proof of that. Thank you.